Hello, hello, Academy. You can, yeah, you can. Thank you, thank you. All right, it's great to have some fans in the first row. No, I'm just kidding. It's not about me, it's about the speakers. And our next speaker is going to talk about a topic that interests not only theoretically, but practically every one of you. So who of you works in an office building? Raise your hand. Office? Who works in the office? Okay, and who works in the rest somewhere, like at home or at any place? Or those people who didn't raise their hand are simply not working, or in coffee houses, or I don't know. Okay, so all of us work somewhere. It's workplace that it is, which affects us all. The next session, our speaker is Claire Burge, who will talk about how to build a workplace to succeed. And she's the perfect person to talk about this because she's the CEO of a company called This Is Productivity, a company that has a mission to transform workplaces, and for them it's all about what they call human acceleration. That's why they use the hashtag happy work. So Claire actually sold her first tech company, which was kind of a social network for postgraduates 5 years ago, and she, besides being an entrepreneur, she holds degrees in psychology and entrepreneurship, so directly at the intersection of what is important in this topic. She grew up in South Africa. Now she currently lives in Dublin, where the headquarters of This Productivity is, but they have multiple offices around in New York, in Cape Town, in London, and soon in San Francisco, as they're growing really, really fast. Claire will share some provocative ideas with you, and maybe at the end of the talk, she might not only transform your workplace, but would have transformed the way you think about workplaces. So without further ado, please welcome, with a very warm applause, Claire!
Hi everybody, it's really good to be here with you today. My CFO and I are busy doing really deep work at the moment on some financials for investors, and we took ourselves off to the Pullman House last night, and it's this beautiful indoor garden with butterflies flying around everywhere. It's a pretty amazing place to work when you're working in Vienna. So Vienna, thank you for having us, it's good to be here. I am a downhill mountain biker, and I absolutely love downhill mountain biking because I learn more business lessons on my downhill mountain bike than I do anywhere else. And I'm busy training for a very intense trek that we're going to be doing across the Alps. We're going to be cycling from Germany right through to Italy. We're going to be doing about 100 kilometers a day with some serious downhill in between to kind of just break the long endurance stunts. And I'm starting a very intensive training program for this next week. And what I've realized through mountain biking, one of the key lessons that I keep learning again and again, and that's pretty much what I want to share with you guys in the next 30 minutes, is that it's really in the details, and it's the details related to the team that ultimately make a business work or ultimately break. And I learn that time and time again, because what makes or breaks every single race that I do on a downhill mountain bike race is not the fact that I've been in the saddle for 50 years or 50 hours, or you know what I mean? It's not the repetitive over and over just being in the saddle, but it's the small exercises, it's the ab exercises that I do. It's the running and the swimming outside of the actual mountain biking, where I'm training very specific muscles inside my body that actually make the downhill race better. It's me understanding how my hands move on the actual, the brakes, understanding how my feet move on the pedals and how my hips move around certain corners. It's those small movements on the bike that ultimately make the race or don't make it. And if I stand back and I think about that, and I think about how that applies to business, it's ultimately the team, and it's ultimately how you set up the team for optimal performance that will make or break your company. And so what we need to realize, and what I want to really challenge you on in the next 30 minutes, is a work revolution is happening. 80% of the stuff that you are doing right now as a founder, as an investor backing a company, and as possibly a team member inside a startup, you're not going to be doing a lot of that stuff in approximately 2 to 3, possibly 5 years' time. And what you need to be doing now and thinking about now is, how am I going to optimize my startup for the humans functioning inside of it? And so if you think about work, there's three very specific ways or angles that you should be thinking about work. So you should be thinking about it in terms of humans, you should be thinking about it in terms of the technology that you use to set up the company, and you should also be thinking about the optimal space. Many of us don't think about startups in these three categories, and yet that is work. It consists of three distinct things, and we need to be paying equal importance and attention to each one of those three factors. And this is the key thing that I want you to walk out of here with at the end of today is, how can I, as a startup founder and as somebody who wants to change the world ultimately with what I'm doing, not be so product focused, but ultimately be focused on creating extraordinary human beings inside my company? Because I can guarantee you that if you put your people first and you create an extraordinary human being, your product will succeed and your product will go to market in a better way. Okay? And so the common myth in terms of startups and the whole tech culture is that you need to get the product right, you need to get the product right, you need to get product market fit. And I couldn't agree more with the previous speaker who made it so very clear that that is only half of the story. The other half is getting that product to market and ensuring sales. And ultimately, it's your team who does that. So if you don't put the team first and if you don't get that right, it's not going to work. And so what I'm going to do is, I've got a very short period of time. This is a long, deep topic. You can talk about this for a very, very long time. But what I want to do is I want to give you some really, really practical stuff that you can take away immediately after this talk. Because ultimately, the Academy and this space inside here is not just about talking about big ideas, but it's actually talking about things that matter. Things that you can go out and practically implement literally directly after the session, if not while I'm talking about it. And what I want you to do is I want you to think about how you can take these things into your company and into your startup literally tomorrow and start making a difference and start thinking about your startup in broader terms and not just from a very, very narrow product perspective. So the very first thing that I want to talk about is, and maybe let me backtrack a little bit and share with you, when I was preparing this talk, I asked myself the question, what are the three key things that I can share with an audience in 30 minutes? And what I did was I thought back to, so my dad died in a tragic car accident a number of years ago when I was 19, and I basically had to take over his business. And that was my first exposure to business. And up until that point, because I'd seen the highs and lows of an entrepreneur who succeeded really, really well, and also failed really, really well, I decided very resolutely that I never ever wanted to be an entrepreneur. And interestingly enough, when I had to take over his company, I actually fell in love with business. And I decided, you know what, this is actually most probably my life path, and I am going to do this. And so that was my first experience within business. And then after that, after I wound down his companies over a period of 2 years, what I then went on and did was I built a startup and brought that to point of sale. And I'm now basically on my second startup. And what I did was I stood back and I said to myself, what are the three consistent things that I did in every single one of those business scenarios that I know significantly made a difference, not only to me as the founder or the leader of that company, but that also made a significant difference to the team inside the company. And these are those three things. So the first thing is, I take my brain very, very seriously, and I take the brains of my team members very, very seriously. Now, what does that mean? First of all, it means that I take a lot of time to study neuroscience. I speak to scientists. I watch trends that are happening inside workspaces. And I really ask myself and I question myself, is that optimally working with how our brains function? So I'm going to go right to the heart of it, and I'm going to say something very thought-provoking. A lot of startups nowadays are using Slack. Slack's an amazing tool. I know Stuart, and I really respect the company that he's built. But the reality is that Slack is actually causing a lot of damage inside teams. And the reason for that is because a lot of the tools that we use that fall into the productivity tool category are not optimized for how we as humans function, okay? And so I'm not only talking about Slack, I'm talking about multiple tools out there. I'm talking about the messaging apps. I'm talking about a lot of the different things out there. These tools are really good, and they are productive tools, and they do help us work better. But the reality is that they're not optimized for brain functioning. Because what they've gone and done is, in the companies and the teams behind these tools, is they've looked at a work problem, and they've gone and they've created a technical solution which doesn't necessarily work according to how the human being functions. And so I feel that as a CEO, it is my priority to understand the way our brains ultimately function and optimally function. Because if I can do that, and I can get my team to function according to the way their brain functions optimally, I know ultimately I will have a healthier team at the end of the day. So my challenge to you on this point is, take a step back and observe the behavior that the tools inside your organization are producing. Are they really productive? Are they really, really getting you to a better place? Or have you, by the tools that you've implemented inside your company, simply created little mini robots who are just sitting there churning out task after task after task after task? We've become like rats on wheels. We don't think anymore in the workplace. We don't dedicate time to planning and strategic thinking. We're just doing, day in and day out. And we really, really do need to take a step back and question whether the behavior that is being produced by the systems inside our companies is really good behavior, okay? It isn't necessarily the type of behavior that you want. And so, if you were to make this practical and ask yourself the question, how do you protect your team's brains? How do you protect your own brain? A very practical example and something that we do within our company is called the principle of the master list. And so the way the master list works is it understands that there's 3 key areas inside a brain. So the first area is your long-term memory, second area is short-term memory, and there's an area called working memory. Now, how working memory functions inside the brain is, it is literally just a catchment area, okay? And so it literally just catches all of the information that's coming at you, that's flying at you every single day. And it acts as a holding space there. And that's really, really important, because what it does is it basically protects the rest of your brain from information overload and holds all the information you're dealing with. But the reality is that that catchment area auto-deletes when it's full, okay? So your brain fills up, and eventually hits a place where it's full and can't process any more information in that area and just auto-deletes it. So a lot of people will admit to me openly and say to me, my memory is not as good as it used to be previously. And the reason for that is because we're processing more information than we ever had to in the past, okay? And so what we do with our teams is we get them to function off of a master list. And the principle that we instill within our company is that what you need to do is you regularly need to be cleaning out that processing area in your brain by just doing regular brain dumps. Okay? Rather than just spending every single day like churning over inside a productivity tool or inside email and just doing the next thing that's grabbing your attention, give yourself very dedicated time in the day where you're sitting down and you've got a list where you're just doing a brain dump. Okay? And so our teams, rather than just sitting chasing email all day long or sitting chasing things inside Slack and those type of tools, have got very specific times when they are thinking. Okay? We've instilled thinking time into our company space. We've instilled learning time into our company. And at the end of the day, we encourage our team to sit down, do a brain dump back onto their master list. And the key thing about the master list is that it's not prioritized. It's not date specific. It's not time specific. The purpose of that list is literally just to clean your brain out. And so it's ultimately about that. It's about going, how does my brain work? And how can I instill that inside a company? And how can I make that a very real reality inside my team? And it's also very, very interesting to see how when you start getting people to become very aware of how their body biologically functions normally and optimally, you automatically have a team that functions healthier because they're able to push back and they're able to say, you know what, this doesn't feel right now, and this doesn't really work. Let's find a better way of working. And so automatically the team is constantly moving in micro movements towards a better way of working. The second thing that I've done, which again goes straight to the heart of what I've just spoken about, is very much, I personally choose to take control of my life. So in 2012, I did a very, very radical experiment. I decided to completely leave email behind, and for 365 days, I did not send one email. And I wanted to see if I was actually able to run the company in that way. Surprisingly, I didn't think I'd be able to do it, but the reaction that I got from people outside of that decision as to me making that decision was what made me realize there's something here, I want to explore this and I want to do an experiment around this. People were either exceptionally furious, like in absolute fury with me, or they were really, really curious as to what I was doing. Like, nobody really gave like a, oh, well, I don't really care about that type of response. And when you get that type of extreme behavior, the psychologist in me goes, I've hit a nerve, I want to explore this. And the reality is that email back then, not so much now, there's other things that have become bigger problems now, but email back then was such a serious problem that it completely consumed people's lives. And it was resulting in unhappy work. And today, in many cases, not so much in Techland, but in other workspaces, it still is a major, major problem. And ultimately, what I learned at the end of that year of not doing email was very much understanding that we've given control over to everybody else except ourselves. We allow everybody else to control our lives. And the reason for that is because we've opened these tools up and they literally just demand our attention all day long. So we're bombarded with notifications. We're bombarded with multiple channels, with multiple people just screaming and shouting. And so it's, what's the next thing lying on top of the pile that will grab my attention? And is it shouting loud enough for me to actually do something about it? And so in the world of tech that we live and breathe and move in as startups, we actually need to step outside of tech to get really good work done. And that's ultimately what I, as the CEO of the company, have decided to do, and I'm actively encouraging my team to do the same thing. Step away from technology and actually bring in the thinking space again. Okay? And so what we do within our company is we've actually actively allocated times where we don't want people to just be on tech the whole time. We say to them, switch off. You don't have to be available at all times on Telegram, inside the collaboration tools that we use. Switch off, step away, do your good work outside of the channels that are demanding your attention. And again, you incrementally see a team producing better work. The quality is better. The thinking process behind it is better. The problem solving is better, which means that the customer is happier, which means that your business moves forward at a much, much faster pace than you think. And so, coming to number 3, which is again something that I've been very, very specific about doing inside all 3 of the companies that I've been involved in, is I've looked at the systems inside the companies and I've gone, do these systems produce the behavior that I want my team to be producing? And so what does that really mean in practical terms? What I'd like you to think about is, I'd like you to think about work as a playground. My theory in terms of how work is going to change moving into the future is that work is going to become more and more chaotic. Okay? If you look at the current tools that make up work, if you look at the co-working spaces that are exploding everywhere, if you look at technologies that are being developed that are going to change the way people work moving into the future, we're going to see a very, very, very different world of work. I don't believe co-working spaces are going to be around for very long, and if they are, they're going to change radically. I don't believe traditional offices are going to be around. Because if you think about it, if we're building exoskeletons and if we're building the Hyperloop, why can't I work in Tokyo in a few days' time if I want to? You know what I mean? And right now, we're recruiting according to location. But location is actually a very, very bad way to recruit, because location doesn't mean that the best skill lives there. The best skill might be 12,000 miles away. And so what we're going to be moving towards is we're going to be moving towards SWAT-style teams who are going to come around a project and then disband very, very quickly. And those teams are going to be constructed around the best skill for the job. And so what I want you to think about is, as we move towards that very, very chaotic world of work, okay, we need to understand that there is some structure within chaos, but we need to frame it and we need to understand it. So think about a children's playground. If you stand outside a children's playground, it's a really, really, really chaotic place. There's kids screaming, shouting, running, jumping. Some kids are sliding, some kids are on a merry-go-round, some kids are on a seesaw. It's very, very busy, and it is seemingly chaotic. But if you think about it, it's not chaotic at all. And there's very specific reasons why certain things have been done and have happened that prevents it from actually being chaotic. A slide produces certain type of behaviors. A swing produces a certain type of behavior. A seesaw produces a certain type of behavior. There's a boundary line, okay? And so what happens is children are unleashed. The actual human in that space is unleashed because the behavior has been thought about. The developmental milestones that that child has to go through have been thought about. And those things are happening whilst the child is freely playing. And where we've gone wrong in work is we've forgotten that that is how kids ultimately develop properly. And we've completely gone and tried and controlled human behavior. We've tried to control the human and hoped that the equipment would somehow conform to that. And we need to switch and we need to go back and we need to make sure, particularly in startups who are changing the world, we need to make sure that we've got the right equipment in place inside our startups to produce the correct behavior that we want from the teams. Because if we do that, collaboration will happen, better problem solving will happen. You need to take a step back, and particularly if you are one of the founders of the startup and you're determining the direction and the strategy of the company, take a step back and ask yourself the very critical question: what behavior does my team need to exhibit? Because if you're not asking that question, you're not going to be able to put the correct processes in place. You're not going to be able to put the correct technology in place, and you're not going to be able to actually design the correct physical space. And so you need to move. The key thing here is that you need to move away from the thought that it's all just about the skill that fits the job that needs to get done. It's not. It's about a hell of a lot more than that. You need to be thinking human, you need to be thinking technology, and you need to be thinking space. And it's a lot to think about. So, coming back to that, we are moving into a world of chaos. We are moving into a different way of working. And the burden rests on the founders of startups to put the correct systems in place. And ultimately, if we do that, we will accelerate the human beings. We will get to a place where we're dealing with extraordinary human beings who will push our dreams and our visions forward. So, how do you practically do this? How do you go and think about work in a different way? What I'd like to leave with you here is there's three different views that you can take on work to really make this practical. The first one is you can think about work. So what is work? Work is actually a very basic thing. And it doesn't matter whether you're the CEO of a company or whether you're somebody just coming in and doing your coffee and doing the cleaning and that type of thing. Across the full spectrum of work within inside a company, it's 5 basic things. Work is communication, tasks, meetings, documents, and time. And when I say time, I'm talking about like calendars and things like that. It doesn't matter what level of the organization you're in. At the end of the day, those 5 things will always be what work is about. Okay? So take that view and ask yourself, how can I put systems and processes and how can I construct the actual workspace to make those 5 areas really, really work? So those 5 things are communications, tasks, meetings, documents, and time. That is ultimately work. Then the other view that you can take on this is the departmental view. So think as the company starts growing. HR, legal, marketing, sales, operations, all of those type of things. Think about their particular needs. Because an HR department needs something very, very, very different to a legal department. And you need to make sure that your tools meet and fit their requirements. And then the last one is the human view. And this is where we come back to the biology. Are we actively thinking about people's brains? Are we thinking about the neuroscience here and understanding how people actually work optimally? And if you take all 3 of those views into account and position and design your workplace in such a way that your team can function optimally there, you're winning. And it's not just about product and market fit. It's not just about sales. It's about more than that. And we're stepping into a different future. And my challenge to you here today is go back to the drawing board and think about work differently, because there really, really is a new world of work waiting for us. Thank you.
All right, so we have a little time for questions. Let's see if there's some on Slido. You can go to slido.com, choose hashtag Pioneer16, select the Academy and ask questions or upvote them, or you can use your mobile phone and download the Pioneers app, or you probably have it already. Click on Interact, choose Academy, and ask questions. Or you can raise your hand, and I'll be writing to you from Mike. Do we already have any questions on Slido? No? All right, anyone? Okay, there's a question over there. Wait, Mike, and stand up, please.
Hi. You talked before about giving your employees time to think, to study. When do you think is a good time during the workday to assign this free time, let's call it?
Okay, it's very business specific. So like, for example, one of the challenges that we currently facing is we service clients globally, you know what I mean? So part of the team is working at times when the rest of the team isn't. Ultimately, what you need to do is the best time in the day is the morning when people have slept, because it doesn't matter how short or how long you've slept, your brain is going through a cleaning cycle. And so when people wake up and when they hit the office, that's the best time. So what we say to our teams is, do your most important work first. So what are the number two, like 1 and 2 things that you have to do today that actually shift your work forward? Make that like your 9 to 11 slot, and at 11, we then encourage people to start learning in that after that. So what we've done is we've actually gotten our teams to create blueprints, which is just an old-fashioned calendar, if you think about it. But what we've gotten our teams to do is we've gotten them to think about breaking and chunking their week down into very specific areas that includes things like learning, thinking, all of those type of things, and getting them to actually allocate that so that they don't just fill their calendars up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
All right, there's a question on Slido, which is, what do you think of David Allen's getting things done methodology? It seems to fit your system.
I am actually not a very big fan of any very, very specific rigid systems. And the reason why I say that is because in our experience working inside companies and doing very, very large transformation projects, it is very difficult for every single individual inside a team to conform to a system. So my advice to people is don't try and get an entire company and an entire team to fit inside a very rigid framework. It will never work.
All right, and then let's take the last question, was asked by Slido. Can you explain the brain dump and master list again? What is it really? Example, please. And thanks for a great talk.
Okay, so the principle of the master list is that most people, virtually every single person that you talk to nowadays, uses lists in some type of form to get work done. Okay, so you generally sit down, you go, what do I need to do today? And you write off a list. It's a task list that needs to happen right now. But a lot of information is hitting you through the day. Okay? You're thinking about your partner's birthday that you need to organize. You're thinking about the date you have to go on. You're thinking about dinner that you need to cook and the fact that your fridge is empty. So your brain is full of information that you actually should be getting out of the way so that you can focus on what you need to do. So the idea behind the master list is creating brain capacity. So it's creating a list that lives outside of your general daily to-do list and the multiple hundreds of other lists that you have. And so it's a place where you're literally just emptying your brain out. Okay? So right through the day, I use the app Wunderlist. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. There's tons and tons of these list apps out there. Todoist, Remember the Milk, there's hundreds of them. I can keep going for days about them. But in any case, I use Wunderlist, and what I just do is I have a list inside Wunderlist called my master list, and as I'm going through the day and all of these hundreds of things are running around in my brain, I literally just do a brain dump onto my master list, and I just clear my brain out so that that working memory area inside my brain is free and it has the capacity to think and focus on the stuff that I really need to focus on now. And what I then do at the end of the day is I also take everything that's on my brain and I put it into the master list. And I basically make sure that the actual tasks that I need to be doing are then part of my daily to-do list, which should be your calendar. And I can maybe just mention something very quickly about that. It's very interesting. If you want to go and do a little bit of a test, go and look at how different your calendar looks in comparison to your to-do list and what you're actually trying to accomplish today. It is scary how many people don't actually allocate enough time to what they're planning to do today. Your calendar and your task list are usually completely in conflict. So your calendar should be your task list. And if you want to then create a list, you can do that. But ultimately, you've only got so much time. So you need to allocate time to everything that you want to do.
All right, we're unfortunately out of time. It was a great talk.
Thank you so much.
I think the answer gives me. So thank you very much, Claire. Give it up. Thank you.